And now I'd like to introduce you to Hans. But this young man is an extraordinary young man. He is a great worship leader in his own right. He's a great preacher, a great pastor, a great servant, hearted young man that just spends his time sowing into others. But he's also incredibly knowledgeable in the workings of the stuff. And most of us who have been around church for a long time know that if we can get the stuff right, it kind of helps a little bit. So why don't you give him a hand and welcome.
Thank you, Glenda. Okay, thanks, Glenda. Unfortunately, Anna, my wife, was here for the, well, not unfortunately, but she was here for the RE part, so it wasn't until she got back that I could stop babysitting and come here, so I missed the first part of what Glenda had to say. But when they came over to Germany a couple of years ago now and work with our music team, it was just great to see. And I was just saying to Anna too, because I don't think I've seen Glenda and Jason since then. I've sort of seen on Facebook, and I've seen them in sort of newsletters that they do. But I just can't believe she seems to be more lively, even more lively now than she was in Germany. And when she came over to Germany, she worked with the music. She worked with the music team. But on the Friday night we had youth, and we said, and Mum and Dad sort of said, "Oh, we want Glenda and Jason. They're great people." They'd met up with Glenda and Jason, had done the praise and worship. Was it in Malaysia or somewhere like that? And they come back and they just said it was amazing. And Glenda and Jason were coming. They said, "We want them to do a Friday night with the youth." And we had these youth that were mainly, we had about 5 or 6 youth that were Christians, and the rest of them were as from like an orphanage, like a juvenile sort of institution for kids that for youth that had some sort of, they couldn't live at home anymore, not necessarily because they didn't have any parents, but because the parents weren't coping with these children because they're getting into crime and what else. And so we had a lot of those kids come in, and we're ministering to them. And I really didn't know, because I hadn't seen Glenda or Jason, and Mum said they're sort of, just a bit younger than us, and they do praise and worship. And I thought, oh gee, how's that going to work? And I was really nervous how this youth evening was going to pan out. I thought, oh gee, I hope no one brings any tomatoes or eggs or anything. But when they actually got up just on the keyboard and guitar and just ministered to the young people, there wasn't one young person there that wasn't touched. And then from there they just went in and did a bit of a, Glenda did a bit of preaching. And then also just stayed around and played pool. We had heaps of pool. We had 3 pool tables, an air hockey table, and all this sort of thing, just to evangelise with these young kids. And they just stayed there the whole evening. I thought, this is great. This is amazing. Mum and Dad were right. And then they spent, I think the Saturday they spent with us working with the music team, and on Friday they led the praise and worship together with us, and it was just amazing to see the gift of God and also just the simplicity and really a heartfelt, and that's what I felt again this weekend, how Glenda was sharing now, saying that it's not a performance. And so often, especially as our churches want to become more and more, what's the word, is it contextualize? As in they want to fit in, we want to be cool, the same as with peer pressure, young people want to be cool and do the things so that other people will like them. We've done that with whole churches now, where whole churches just want to fit in and not change anything, just fit in to make everyone happy and to keep everyone happy and hopefully to grow a big church. And so, I've still got my sunnies on my head. Probably don't need those anymore today. And music teams and worship teams, unfortunately, I've been to many, many churches where I've sort of felt that God hasn't been there in the praise and worship. And it's really sad. For me, it's the saddest thing to sit through or to stand through or to clap through, sing through a worship service, and you're really feeling like, I'd rather be somewhere else. Nothing's happening here. God's not doing anything here. Not because he doesn't want to, but because he's not allowed. He's sort of been rationalized out of it. And that's definitely, that just annoys, that annoys me so much to see that, because God wants to be right in the middle of it. And like we heard this morning, when God's part of things, sometimes things do get turned upside down. Things might get messy. I remember the praise and worship sessions we had that were the best were the ones where we might have had some argument in the music team. It might have been a big uproar, people storming out and whatever else before the service. And then and we didn't really know what was going to happen. We were just at the point of, I want to go home. Let's just forget this. Let's just, I think even once or twice we talked to Mum and Dad and said, can we just leave the praise and worship today? Like, I'm just not feeling it. You know what I mean? This has happened and whatever's happened, and can we just walk away from this and just have preaching today? And Mum and Dad say, no, we want you to do the praise and worship. And so it was like, the first song was just so hard, you know what I mean? And you would force yourself to do it. But the praise and worship was amazing. People were being touched all over the room. The music team was being touched. People came up afterwards and said, it was so amazing. We loved your praise and worship. And we thought, that's when you wake up and think, well, it obviously can't be me. Because I wasn't feeling, when we started, I wasn't feeling anything. Like, I was ready to backslide and walk out of this place. And still, God uses us in any capacity that he possibly can. And it doesn't have to be much of us, as long as we're willing to give it. Amen. Okay, so just briefly today, I want to talk about sound team. And we used to just talk about the sound team. It was just a sound team, that's the guys up the back. Right? Nowadays, it's the sound, it's the lighting, it's the cameras. It's the multimedia team. It's the media team, we call it in Gympie. I'm from COC, from Victory Church in Gympie, and now also in Maryborough, and was the music director there for 2 years when we moved over in 2010, and am now currently the site pastor of both churches. So it's usually when Pastor George and Margie in Garmisch, in Gympie, we're in Maryborough and vice versa. So I'm sort of out of the music team, even though as soon as I'm not preaching, I'm on the music team. There's no such thing as a free Sunday, and Glenda knows all about that. You're always doing something, but it's good. And Pastor George once said to me, I think he could see that I was slightly stressed with everything. He said, we wouldn't be any other way. And that's true. The Sundays where I have sat down and haven't done anything, even if it was once in the last 3 years, I just felt like something was missing. I felt like I should be doing something. And so I sort of have to force myself every now and then to just enjoy a service from the perspective of the audience, or from the perspective of the worshippers, rather than actually, doing it from the front. So I just want to talk to everything about techniques today. So the media team as such. That's all right. The first point is reliability and commitment. And Pastor Mark, when I was, he rang me up, I think it was last week. Well, he rang Elizabeth, and Elizabeth walked into my office because I'm the IT manager at Victory College in Gympie, and she's the principal's secretary. So she walked in with an iPhone and said, my dad's on the phone, can you talk to him? And I was sort of in the middle of everything, and I thought, oh yeah, of course. And so I talked to him, and he said, Hans, I wanted you to talk about sound. And I said, oh, okay. Well, what would you like me to speak about? And first he said, oh, well, anything. And I thought, oh, that's great. It doesn't sort of give you any boundaries at all. But as I sort of listened to him a bit, I could tell, and he sort of said what he wanted me to talk about was reliability and commitment was one of the points that he really sees as important for churches. And so I really want to hammer that today. In that, and we've recently also, every church, over in Germany for 20 years with my parents' church, there's always, in the music team and on the sound team, on the media team, wherever you are, there's people that are committed, and they'll just work themselves to the bone for maybe 10, 15 years, and then all of a sudden they'll probably just blow their top and walk out and won't want to touch it ever again. But then there's others that'll say, yes, I'm going to be in and I want to be on every Sunday and whatever else. And then when you rely on them, they just don't turn up. The service is starting and they're nowhere to be seen. So you sort of have two extremes which both aren't healthy, I don't think. And there's a picture in the Bible of labourers. A guy, the master of this vineyard, came in and said, who is willing to come and work in my vineyard? And he asked one lot of people and they said, no, not interested, not coming. And he asked another lot of people and they said, oh yeah, we'll come, we'll do it. And when it actually came down to it, the people that said, yeah, we'll do it, they didn't show up. And the other people that said, nah, not interested, they ended up showing up and actually doing the work. And God said, which one do you think your Heavenly Father would prefer? And he would prefer the people that say no and then actually do something than the people that say, yes, I'll do everything and put their hand up and then don't show up. So commitment is definitely a thing that is very important to God, and it's very important to a senior pastor. And I know now, I've noticed it all these years with my parents, working closely together with them and now with Pastor George for the last 3.5 years. And in June, on the 18th of June, we're leaving for Germany to move back over there and pastor a church in Munich. So I know as a senior pastor, I'm going to be looking for people that are prepared, that not just put their hand up, but are actually going to be there and actually going to be relied on. But I think there's one thing that I am also very conscious of, having been a worship leader for, 7 years, and a person on the sound desk for 13 years, is that sometimes, and often, pastors aren't quite aware of how much effort you put in to what you do. And so if there's any pastors in the house here today, just try to get around your sound people and your media people and try to get a bit of a glimpse. You might never understand what all the knobs are for. You might never understand what they're talking about half the time because it's all out there. But try to get around them and try to build a relationship with them. As Glenda was saying when I just walked in before, she was saying try to build a relationship. She was, at that point in time, she was trying to build a relationship in the music team and in the worship team. She was trying to build that culture first before worrying about it sounding excellent and before worrying about all these other things. And I think it's really important for senior pastors to get around their music teams and to find out where they're at and to never take them for granted. Because me working for 13 years as a sound guy for mum and dad, first of all, there was often times where Dad, that was just his personality. He would only ever say something if something went wrong. So he wouldn't really say, oh, the sound was good today, but you'd hear it every time that it wasn't good. So obviously that was building up over long periods of time, just getting all the negative, no one ever saying anything good about the sound, no one ever saying anything good about, your job. And then it became a job, really, because you'd do it every Sunday. There was no Sunday you could have off, pretty much. You could have as much time off during the week as you wanted, but as long as you were there on Sunday and for music practice. But you can very easily get a grudge. You can very easily get if you don't watch that heart attitude, you can very easily get to a place where you don't want to do it anymore. And you don't even want to come to church because as soon as you come to church, you're going to be roped in for something. As soon as something goes wrong on the sound desk, they'll call you and say, hey, Hans, go fix it. So it's a two-edged thing, right? So there's some that mightn't commit, and there's others that might overcommit where they should be saying, look, I really want to do 3 out of 4 Sundays so I can have a Sunday off with my family. I know for my wife, for Anna, it was very important. She said, you're always on. You're always doing something. You're always on the stage or you're always on the sound desk. We can never come to church and just be a couple. I'm always on my own with the kids. I've got to look after the kids. And for a time, I remember when we were first married, she didn't even want to come to church anymore. She said, because you're just working all the time, I won't even see you anyway. What's the point? And that obviously wasn't a good attitude, but it's understandable. If you're almost, you become At that time, I couldn't quite see it her way, but over time I've learnt to see that in some cases she was almost like a standalone, what do you call it, standalone mum or single mother. Because when it come to church was priority. I just went off, did the stuff at church, and it was like, yeah, you worry about the kids, you worry about whatever you got to worry about, and I'll see you after church. And so church really became a real thing for her that she didn't want to go to, because this was just, you know, it wasn't a good experience for her. So I had to learn, okay, priority first, and this is something that, you know, we got to learn. God first, family second, and then ministry, right? And for many years, it was God first, ministry, and then if the family's got any time, family comes third place. But that's not the way God, he says, get your household in order first before you go into ministry, before you strive to become a leader or something in the church. It has to be family first. And so that was a real wake-up call for me. Now, if you're working on anything with this sound desk, you know, lighting, cameras, anything like that, it's a ministry, it's not a hobby. And over the years, people come to me and said, oh, I really love doing sound, you know, I really love turning the knobs, I really love doing this sort of thing. I've sort of become a bit wary of that, because people that just do it for hobby, as soon as it becomes work, they say, nah, stuff it, I don't want to be part of it. And so I had to learn to find out, no, do you see this as your ministry? Do you see this as your calling? And if you don't see sound as your calling, if you don't have a vision for great sound, if you don't have a vision for doing the camera to the best of your capability, if you don't have a vision for those type of things, don't do it. Because you're not going to make yourself happy, you're not going to make God happy because you're not putting everything into it, and you're not going to make your senior pastor happy either. You'll know the people that are really committed, because they're the people that will actually go out and buy their own equipment. They won't wait for the church to say, okay, you know, they won't wait for the pastor to say, oh, right, we're going to buy some good speakers. They'll actually be the people that'll go and get their own sound system, because the church one isn't adequate. They bring their own sound system and they set that up. And that's how you know someone that it's their ministry. It's the same with musicians, same with singers, you know. You'll see some musicians that'll just use somebody else's guitar, somebody else's amp. It's not really their calling, because if it was their calling, they want to invest into it. They want to put time and effort into it, the same as getting lessons, anything like that. The same, everything that Glenda said actually fits well to everything on the sound team and the audio visual. Because if it's your vision, you'll put something where, it says in the Bible, where your heart is, that's where your treasure will be. Meaning, whatever's important to you, you're going to spend money on it. Whatever's important to you, you're going to invest in it. So if you're not investing in it, it just means to me that it's probably not your main calling. It might be something else. If you're investing in something, if I see you investing in other things in the church, that might end up being your calling. You know, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person because you're not investing. You know, you might just want to help out on the sound desk. Well, that's fine. But you can't really build the team or a sound team around that person that isn't actually sold to that ministry, if you know what I mean. One thing that's very important for music, especially for sound guys, and I run into it all the time, is for sound people to remain teachable. Because I'm preaching to someone here. Because what I've noticed over the years, and I've noticed it myself, if Dad, the senior pastor of the church, wanted to tell me anything about sound, it was like, oh, well, wait a minute, this is my area, I've studied sound, you know, just take a few steps back now, you know, because they say, senior pastors say the most idiotic things too. Like, well, I'm going to be one myself, so it'll come back on me, don't you worry. But they say things like, oh, it's just so muddled. It's so muddy. It's so, what did Mum used to say? It's so squeaky. It's so squeaky. And you say, what's so squeaky? Who is squeaky? You know, I'll fix it, but tell me who's squeaky. Oh, it's just all squeaky. And they'll say things like that as a blanket sort of thing, or they'll say, it's all too loud. And usually, it's not true. Usually it's not all too loud. Something is too loud. And if you find out what it is, and that's your job as a sound guy, to work with the senior pastor and work with their lingo. They're never going to be able to say, oh, I think it's the bass guitar, I think it's the 175 hertz, I think you need to take that down just a bit, and then it'll be sweet. They'll never talk that language. So you've just got to understand what they mean by muddy, squeaky, loud. Do they mean the guitar's too loud? What do they actually mean? And remain teachable. So I'll often go to, wherever I go, and I was just down in Ballina last weekend doing the praise and worship there for a men's conference for Momentum 2013 at Jim White's church. And I was working with the sound guys there, and they're amazing. There's two sound guys, two main sound guys, and they are just amazing. And they would be the people that I would have in a frame saying these are the perfect sound people. Just because, like on the one evening, they wanted to do something outside in a campsite sort of thing. And the one guy brought in his whole, I didn't know it was his sound equipment. He set up all this sound equipment that he uses for outreaches. And I said, oh, this is great sound equipment. Who's this belong to? The church must have bought this. And he said, no, it's mine. I said, you bought this whole sound setup. It's probably worth, $7,500 or something. It's not a massive setup, but it's a mixing desk, the speakers, the amplifiers, the fold backs, 2 TVs that they use outside, the whole shebang with racks to mount it on. And he's actually doing an apprenticeship as a fitter. So he did all the fittings, so it all fits on the rack, and you can obviously see he's put in heaps and heaps and heaps of time into this. And I was just blown away, that he'd set up all that equipment and let us use it. And often musicians and singers and people don't always look after equipment, especially if it's not theirs. If it's theirs, it gets a red carpet rolled out to it. They put candles on it, especially guitarists. Don't they, Jason? I don't know if Jason does it, but I know a couple of guitarists that pretty much bow down to their amplifier. And they have got, I must admit, these guitarists have got really good setups, and I'd be very jealous to have their setup. But if I was a guitarist, that is. But sometimes when something belongs to someone else, we don't quite appreciate it as much. And that's just one thing. If you bring in your whole sound system as a sound guy, if you bring in your own cameras as a camera person because the church can't afford it, that really shows me that, what I was saying before, that your heart's with it. One thing that we changed 2010 when I come on board in Victory Church was Pastor George talked to me and said the music team and the media team, or the sound team, he just called them, seem to be 2 different teams. They don't want to sort of deal with each other much. Like there seemed to be almost, not rivalry, but there seemed to be like the sound team. When I was up the back with the sound team working with them, I'd hear, oh yeah, these musicians, they just never do this, or they just never do that, or yeah, forget it, I can't be bothered working with those singers, or I can't be bothered. When I'm on stage, it's like, oh yeah, if that guy's on, it's hopeless. Our sound on stage is just going to be awful. And you know what I mean? And I just worked out, wow, there's some real communication problem happening here, and they're so far apart that they can't hear each other mumbling about each other. But one thing I suggested doing, I said, well, let's bring the 2 teams together. Let's bring the media team and the music team under one. Up till that time, there was one leader for the media team, and he'd look after all the media stuff, and there was one for the music team. And that person that was doing the media team sort of moved on anyway around the time that he'd had enough, he didn't want to do it anymore. And so I said, well, let's bring the 2 together under one leadership. And that way they'll be fighting against themselves, which they're not going to do. And that's turned that turned the whole atmosphere around, because I said we're one team. If we start, and I actually got the sound team to come to music practice. Up till then, they wouldn't come on that night. The media team wasn't there. They didn't come to a music practice because that's a music practice. They would meet some other time and talk about their sound issues and things like that, but they would not be there on a music team evening because they said, no, it's music team, nothing to do with us. And so when I brought that in under one covering, I said, I want you there every Thursday night. And I don't care if you just sit there, you're going to be part of it. And you're going to pray together with us as well. Now, some people were able to accept that and got right with it, with that vision. And some others were just like, no, I don't like this. But, you know, but they either got over it over the time, or they just ceased to do it, not because I stopped them, but their heart wasn't in it. And they said, no, I don't like these new changes. I don't like these new things. But we just realized we had to stop that bickering and that stuff that was happening between the two teams. And to do them, we had to say, you're one team. So, and I've talked to pastors since where I've seen exactly the same thing, and I haven't said anything, I've just observed it. And then afterwards they said, oh, we've got some sort of issue here with our music team, they don't seem to get on with each other. And I said, well, have you ever thought of bringing them into one team? You can even call them the music team, and just have, you know, or you know what I mean? You can call them worship team, because I really believe, which is the next point, that a good sound man, a good sound woman has to be a worshipper. You know, often we've had people that are just professionals in their own right. They're professionals as soundmen, they're professionals as camera guys or whatever else, but they're not worshippers. You never see them worshipping. You never see them with their hands raised. They're task orientated. They just want to get their job done and leave me alone with all that Holy Spirit stuff, you know, pretty much. And but what I really pray for is to see sound people that are worshipping. Like, I want to see them do their job well, don't get me wrong. I love professionals. I love working with people that know their stuff. But at the end of the day, I want to see them, when I look at the back, I want to see them with their hands raised, eyes closed, when the sound's all fine, they got all that worked out, that they're actually having time in worship with God. Amen? Because that is their ministry, and it is part of their worship to God. In the Bible it says that everything that we do should be worship to God, and everything that we do should bring honor to God. So, you know, for some reason we think everyone behind this line here ministers, and everyone on the other side of that line gets ministered to, you know. And the sound desk is another line back there, and they're just like an appendix. They're a part of the church somehow, but they never get touched. They never come to the front for prayer. They're just always up the back, and they seem to do their own thing. But what I really want to see is that they're part of the ministry team. They're part of the worship. They see their sound and they see their role. They see whatever they do, whether it's the lighting, whatever it is, they see themselves as part of the whole. In the Bible it talks about a body having many different parts, and there's some that you see, meaning up the front, and there's some that you don't see, you know. It's like whoever was doing I couldn't even tell you the name, unfortunately. I know what the girl looks like. The name of the person providing us with food here and cooking for us this weekend. She's not here now, and often I've noticed she's not in the meetings. Why? Because her ministry is providing us with food. Okay, and that unfortunately means that she's missing out on some of, you know, this great teaching and some of these great things that have been happening the last couple of days. But that's her ministry, and that's really what she loves, and somebody's got to do it. Amen. And so the sound people are sometimes not seen, but they're definitely heard. Amen. And they can be worshippers the same as we can be worshippers, and they're just as important. So the sound guy's job is to make it as easy as possible for people to get into worship. That's obviously the job of the musicians and singers as well, and the worship leader is to get people into the presence of God as soon as possible and without sort of any hindrances. So our job really as sound people is to take away any thresholds, to take away any hindrances, and especially with sound, to take away anything that's disturbing. So one thing that I'm not interested so much if it's loud or if it's soft. I'm interested is the sound pleasant? Is it pleasant to my ear, or is it disturbing? Are there frequencies in there that are annoying? Is there stuff in there where I just say, and sometimes, and I even had Elizabeth come up to me recently for her, because Elizabeth's one of our sound people. She's one of the main sound people and does a great job. And she came to the sound desk when I was doing sound and said, Hans, I thought about it a lot. I thought about coming to you and saying something about the sound a lot. I was a bit afraid to do it, but she just said, I can't stand the sound halfway down the hall. It sounds awful. And at first I was like, well, I can take this either of two ways. I can say, well, that's just your opinion. Or I can say, all right, point noted, I'm going to go and listen from your, listen to what it sounds like from where you stand. And so I did. She went down. It took me probably to go through all that process in my mind, took me about a minute or something. So she was already back at her seat. And then I went down and stood behind her, and it sounded shocking from where she was, because she was right in front of the speaker. It was hitting her in the face, and then they'd put these barricade walls sort of up right behind her, because they were sort of wanting to make the room smaller for her, make it more intimate, blah, blah, blah. So what she was getting was the speaker blast from the front, and then she was getting it reverberating back. So she was getting double, and I noticed when I stand behind the screen, I heard absolutely, it sounded great. Stand in front of the screen, sounded awful. And the sound desk was obviously behind the screen, about 10 meters behind the screen. So from where I stood, it sounded awesome. I was loving the sound. I thought, this is a great mix, even if I say so myself, And then it had to take Elizabeth to come and tell me to do my job and go actually to where the people are and listen to what it sounds like there. And often as sound people, we just got to do that. Even in the service, I'll go up and I'll stand beside Pastor George, even though I know that he's going to have something that he wants changed. Sometimes you're afraid to ask because they'll tell you what sounds good and what doesn't sound good, and sometimes you don't want to know. But the thing is to come to a position where you're secure enough in yourself to be able to accept criticism and just say, okay, I'm going to work with that. That's, I'm going to make it sound good. So I'll go and stand beside Pastor George, and I'll listen to it myself and already have some thoughts of my own, what I want to change, and then I'll ask Pastor George. If he hasn't said something by then, I'll say, what do you think about the sound? And he say, no, there's just that, there's this or there's that. And it's usually the same things that I've heard as well. Sometimes it's something different. Anyway, I'll go, my job as sound guy is to get it to sound as good as possible. So I need feedback. And the people in the congregation aren't professionals. They won't know exactly, like I said before with the pastor, they'll just say it's muddy, it's this, it's that, it's annoying, there's something in there, I don't like it, And they usually have an attitude when they tell you, not the senior pastors, but other people in the church, they just go, too loud. And I tell you, if you ask Heidi, who's my sister, Heidi Popp, you might have seen her or heard her, she hates it when somebody sticks their fingers in their ears when she's singing. She hates it so much. Because you don't know what that feedback means. Does it mean the whole thing sounds shocking? Does my voice sound shocking? Does my keyboard playing sound shocking? What sounds shocking? Because when people just do this, you don't know what it means, And it's just, it doesn't make you feel any better on the stage, right? If you're worship leading, it does not help in any way. So if there's any way of you refraining from doing this, if you do that, please refrain from doing it. I mean, Dad even got one of those boxes of the things we used yesterday at shooting, the what do you call them, earplugs? And people that would complain about sound, it was always the same people, and you'll know it in your church, there's always the same people that say, this is too loud, whatever. He just handed out earplugs. He said he always had a stash of them, and he said, here. And that was his solution, because he said, it's not too loud for me, it's not too loud for the majority, so you just got sensitive hearing, here you go, And I thought that was cool. For many years, it was a sound guy's problem, but Dad actually, saw the light. And I think in the meantime, we learnt a lot as sound people. Praise God, we're on a journey, and we can go from awful sound to nice sound, hopefully as soon as possible. So there's thousands of tutorials on YouTube. Nowadays, you can put anything in YouTube, you'll get an answer. So if you want to find out what settings to do and what little things you can tweak instruments to, I would suggest just going there. But I just want to finish on a couple of little tips and tricks that I've noticed over the years. One thing that I demand as a sound person is that we get there early enough so we can do a sound check. I've even have the music director which we have at the moment, and I've got to know him quite well, and I appreciate him now. When he first started, beginning of last year, I didn't necessarily appreciate him. I've told him, and I've told other people, so so you can put that on air. It doesn't matter. He knows. But he would just skip the sound check. He would just expect you to do the sound check while the music practice is on. And if you're a soundman, you'll know that makes it very, very difficult, because you can't hear exactly what's happening. You can't pinpoint. And the thing is, in Gympie, we have a different music team every Sunday. I mean, they just get put together, whoever's there is on. We do have a roster, but it's never the same combination. Elizabeth will tell you, it's never the same combination of people any given week. In 3 years, we mightn't have had exactly the same team on once. So every Sunday you have to adapt, and you have to start pretty much from scratch with each person's instrument and amplifier and voices and whatever else. So my part as a sound guy is to become as quick as I can at setting up the sound, but I do demand a sound check. So I'll say, okay, I'll say to the music director, how much time are you going to give me for a sound check? And they'll usually say, 5 minutes or 3 minutes. And so I'll usually push that out and say, okay, 15 minutes. And I reckon in 15 minutes you can get pretty good sound. And if you can't get in 15 minutes, just means you have to practice some more, and you will eventually get it done in 15 minutes. This is meaning after everything's plugged in. I mean, there's work to be done, plug all that stuff in, but you can do that, and I'm talking to sound guys here, do that even before people rock up, okay? Do your groundwork, switch the system on, don't wait till everyone arrives and then go around and start plugging in leads. If you know who's going to be on and there's no excuse, there's a roster, you know there's going to be acoustic guitar, there's going to be this, so you can work out how many cables you need, how many DI boxes you need, how many amplifiers you're going to need, what microphones you're going to use, and you can have all that set up. And I've literally come in a 3/4 of an hour earlier, which costs me a lot, getting up early in the morning. But I've come in early, I've set up all the stage, and the music practice and the sound check has just run so much smoother compared to other times where I've just got there when everyone else has got there, and I've had to run around and people have been stressed, why isn't the sound running yet? And it's taken half the practice till we actually do a sound check. And it's not always the sound guy's fault. Sometimes the musicians and singers just loiter around doing all sorts of stuff, and you've got to call them to order because the music director seems to be oblivious to what's happening. So, but it's just about communication, you know. If you see things going wrong, don't get an attitude about it. Don't wait till you blow your top, which I usually do. I usually wait till I can't stand any longer, and then I'll have it out with someone. It's best, and I'm learning to, and I have to learn it as a senior pastor, it's important to go to people when the issue arises, deal with it. And I'm often a person that I'd be fired up, I want to talk to that person afterwards. And then during the worship and that type of thing, it sort of all settles down and I'm happy again, pacified again. By the time I see that person again for music practice, I've forgotten about it, you know what I mean? But the problem is, next time it adds to that thing that I had in there that I haven't resolved. And it keeps adding, stays unresolved. And sooner or later, that's when you get the sound person or the person on the media team who just walks out, won't even tell you what's wrong. They just walk off, don't want to know anything, never doing sound again. And you think, well, what happened? What happened? And truly on that day, probably nothing happened, or it was very small, but something has been happening for a long time. And that's, you know, as a senior pastor and as a music director, that's a worship leader, that's something that you have to be onto. It's just all about communication. The other point is rubbish in, rubbish out. If you've got musicians or singers that are using, you know, rotten microphones or rotten DI boxes, or they've got an old, I remember, you know, I know myself starting off as a musician, my first instrument was a bass guitar that I bought myself in this package deal with a tiny little 15-watt amplifier, and it sounded awful. It was shocking. That's all I could afford, right? And so, praise God, we can start at some point. But there's some musicians and singers that I've noticed as a music director over the years, they never move, they never progress, they never have a vision of going to the next step. So they just stick with that old crappy instrument. It's beaten up, it sounds awful. They've got the money, it's not like they haven't got the money, they just don't see any point. What's the point? It's just for church, it's just for, you know, just for Sundays, we just do a couple of songs, why should I spend all this money? But the truth is, you're letting the whole team down because your guitar or your bass or your drums, whatever it may be, is making everything else sound rotten as well. And so, you know, as a sound guy, you sort of, sometimes you can't talk to the musicians about that. Depends how it is run at your church. Sometimes you can. Sometimes you need to go and see, you know, it's never wrong anyway to go and see the music director or the worship leader and say, hey, I've got a real problem with this. They really want that guitar to sound good, but on that amplifier, it's just not possible. I mean, if you're standing in front of the amplifier and it sounds shocking there, how do you think it's going to sound with a microphone in front of it and then through the system? It can't be better. It can't be better. It's not possible. It can be worse, yes, very easily worse, but not necessarily better. So rubbish in, rubbish out. Just talk, if you're any senior pastors here, talk to your musicians and singers about investing in good equipment. If it's their ministry, they should. The sound outside is the biggest priority. So, you know, if singers, musicians on stage, what I do first is I set up the front of house sound first. I get that sounding good, and then, depending on how much time we have, I set up for the musicians and singers. And I always get around to it, I always do it anyway, and then I always walk around and have a listen too. But the priority has to be, and if there was always a toss-up, which one is going to sound best, and if we haven't got any time, well, the front of house is always going to be a priority, because that's what we're here for. We're here for the people. We're here to get the people into worship. That's our job as musicians and singers. So if you've got one musician, and every now and then you'll have a musician that just seems to live in this bubble of my sound is important, and my instrument is important, and everything else can go to hell pretty much. If you have that, you'll have to deal with that. And you won't have to deal with that as the as the sound man. You'll have to deal with that as the music director. So if you see that as a, you know, if there's constantly a problem there, you definitely need to take it to your leadership and say, listen, we just never get to doing a sound check for anything else because we're forever just stuck on this one instrument. Or this one guy's foldback, he wants to, you know, he just has to have it perfect. He's not interested in anyone else. And there's just a right balance that we should keep. The last point I want to leave you with is listen to praise and worship in the style and the sound of what your pastor and your worship leader or music director wants to see in that church. The vision of the church and the vision of the music team. Listen to those CDs. So we've had people on the sound desk who only listen to heavy metal. They love guitars, they love drums, and funny enough, when they do a mix, that's all you can hear: drums and guitars, nothing else. You know, no vocals, or maybe only the lead vocal. Never hear any background vocals. But it's because that's what they're listening to, right? It's because that's the only thing they know. So it's just your responsibility as a sound guy to get the vision of the church, get the vision of the worship team. If they're doing a lot of Hillsong songs, well, you better be listening to Hillsong at home and listening to how they mix their sound, how they mix the guitars, how they mix the keyboard, how they mix the voices. And so that, because if you don't know what they sound like, what the original sounds like, you're never going to get the worship team sounding like that, all right? There's a big part for the music team to play in that, but there's an even bigger part, I think, that the sound guys have to play in that. So I just want to, just leave you with that today. Immerse yourself really in that vision of the music team. You're not out of the music team, you're part of the music team. You're there to make the music team sound good. That's your job, to make them sound good. Make them, you know, even when the preacher's there preaching, it's your job to make the preaching sound good. It's your job to make everything sound as good as it possibly can. Because we're a team. If one person lets it down, a team's only as strong as or a chain's only as long as the weakest link, there's a saying. And a team's only as strong as the person that lets it down by either not having the experience or not being willing to learn. Okay. Thank you very much. So the majority are musicians and singers, so you'll obviously know this point of view, and hopefully you've learnt a bit about the point of view from you know, and it's just, the sound guys are important and just as important as you standing up on stage. Often we forget that, but just treat them well, they treat you well. What comes around, goes around, comes around, whatever. No worries. Any questions? Yeah.
Like, we've just got the desk there. I'm just wondering, like, what's the best thing to, like, when we do music practice, we try and set it, but of course it changes when you've got people there. Yeah. What's the best way of getting the best sound, like, once you're actually in the service? Like, what sort of settings do you go with, you know, just an overall thing, or how do you get it so that...
Yeah, well... Yeah, that's something that happens all the time is, unfortunately, you can't do a sound check with a full congregation. If you did a sound check with a full congregation, you wouldn't have near as much feedback issues. You wouldn't have near as much noise issues because bodies absorb sound. And they absorb the high frequencies mainly. So you might have noticed if you go into the toilets or into the creche or the mother's room, anything like that, during the service, what frequencies do you still hear? You hear the boom, you hear the bass guitar, you hear the kick drum. You don't hear the high frequencies because they don't travel through walls. They bounce off walls and go all over the place. So unfortunately, during the sound check, you're going to have sound bouncing off everywhere because there's no bodies to stop it. Do as much as you can to the building. There's some really cheap solutions, and we were the team of cheap solutions because we never had any money. So we would find ways of doing things really cheaply. And our main problem, actually sound-wise over the years, was drums. In a lot of churches it'll be drums. Acoustic drums, just because you can't really contain them. There is one way you can put the sound, what are they called? Sound, yeah, perspex, and there's the ones that go the whole way around with a lid, and there's a door. Problem with that is, and Glenda will know this, is it's really hard to work with the drummer if he's in a cage. It's hard to communicate with him. And we've done it for many years. It's just very difficult to get the drummer having that dynamics that you have in the team if he's locked away in a box. Because he only hears through his headphones, or he hears through a foldback, and it sounds, often I've walked in the drummer's thing there, listened to his foldback, and I said, how can you work with this? I could not work with that sound. And he'd never said, this drummer that I'm talking about over in Germany, never said anything. Never said Dickie Bird about it. But he should have, because based on that sound, no wonder he played the way he played. You know what I mean? He was doing very good for that sound. So unfortunately, during the music practice, you'll have to cater for worst case scenario, which means no people, which means sound bouncing around everywhere. So actually, it's only going to sound better when people come. It won't sound worse. It'll sound better when people come, and you might even have to just take it up one notch because it'll be a lot quieter because people will... but this area here, I don't know how we get so good sound, but I think it's just because we got open areas and the back's open. If this shed was closed on the site right to the ceilings and the back, it would just be coming back all the time because you've got concrete floor, which is the absolute worst you can do. You've got tin roof, which is the worst you can do. But I've been amazed at the sound in this area, but that's just because the sound can go out and it never comes back. There's no echo coming back. And those speakers are faced out. If they were faced at the wall, if they were faced anywhere else, faced at the floor, it would sound awful in here. So the building has a lot to do with it, and there's cheap solutions to fix that. Containing the drums is one of them, and in Gympie we've just invested in some electric drums from Pearl. It's called the Pearl E-Pro, and they're not that expensive. If you buy a nice kit, it's anywhere from $1,500 upwards, and this kit new is $2,500, but we got one second hand. You can't see that it's been used at all. I mean, it looks new, and we got it for $950 instead of $2,400. And now you can hit the mute button and the drums are off, same as any other instrument. You hear nothing. Now, of course, with that we've had to adapt some other things on stage because all of a sudden the musicians can't hear the drummer. And so we've had to adapt some other things. So each change you make will have other implications. And you might have to change things a couple of times to get it the way that you want. Any other questions? Yeah.
I've got a question as to whose responsibility is it when, for example, a person comes with a prophecy to the front and a musician is playing in the spirit in the background. Is it the musician's responsibility to soften it down, or is it the mixer's responsibility so that the prophecy can be heard?
Well, I think either or. So I think both of them. I think the guy on sound should be ready to, if the person on the keyboard or on the instrument isn't sensitive enough and doesn't notice that he's actually playing too loud, then the sound guy should bring it down. But ideally, the musician would feel, you know, especially if someone's moving in the spirit, they just, you know, generally would feel when to bring it up and when to bring it down. And you've noticed Glenda does that all the time. If you haven't noticed, watch again this evening. She does it all the time. The dynamics, she brings it up. Jason with the guitar as well. She gives him, you just watch Glenda, she gives him the look all the time. The look, and she'll point to the microphone, meaning you sing now, and she'll point to someone else on the microphone, meaning, no, she's got a word at the moment, don't you play? And then other times she'll go, all right, which means Jason, let loose, you know? And so I've noticed that the whole time, that communication that goes back and forwards, and if you have a look at it, you'll notice it as well. So it's just being sensitive. And you'll notice people that are seasoned musicians and worshippers, they just know when to be loud and when not, generally. Everyone has an off day, but generally you know when to and when not to. And if not, that's definitely something you should work on.
The problem comes for me when I come to edit the video, when you've got loud music and I've got a wonderful prophecy coming and we can't hear it because it's all comes through one speaker.
Yeah, so I'd agree that, well, yes. If the musician doesn't do it, then
the difficulty you have right at here is that your everything's coming through your camera, isn't it? Generally in church what will happen is that if it's set up right, is that the prophecy's coming through the desk, and if you're actually recording it at the time, if you've got the correct equipment, you can actually edit it that up and down from there. But when that's not available, it's very difficult. I'm not sure that there's a quick answer to that. Yeah.
So there's sound coming off the desk already, but obviously if it's coming to, like the keyboard compared to the speaker's microphone is coming through louder, then it's going to be louder on the recording as well. So at some point, if you want to become, you know, more and more professional at, you know, cameras and all that type of thing, the thing is, at some point you'll have a separate mixer where the sound comes into and you can mix it how you need it. Where in Maryborough, the church that we're now transitioning, they're getting a digital desk, which means 24 channels go straight into, with one Firewire cable, they go straight into a MacBook Pro, and it records and you can play it back through the desk and edit it in real time and just burn a CD straight off it after the message. So. And that's not, you know, everyone, when you say digital desk and that sort of type of setup, they think, oh, that's going to be heaps and heaps of money. It's about $2,300 for a digital desk, and an analog desk will cost you at least that much. And then the MacBook Pro, you can pick them up for $1,100, especially if you know someone that has a school. Or someone, you can get it through there because they'll get educational pricing. But it's not that expensive. So for, you know, way under $5,000, you can have a really good recording setup nowadays. Back in the day, you needed $50,000 for that. Now you can get it quite cheaply. Anyone else? No worries. Well, I'll let yous go. And when are we back here, Glenda? 7, and dinner's at 6, is it? 6 o'clock. No worries. Well, we'll see you back here this evening. Thank you very much.